A couple of introductions first. I'm Andy McCann. I'm a sales engineering manager at Snowflake. Been at Snowflake about 3.5 years previously as a sales engineer, now as a sales engineering manager in this year. And I'm here to have a chat with Andrew, or Andy as I know him, who I looked after the last few years when I was a sales engineer at LSEG. So, Andy, I don't know if you want to do a quick introduction.
Thank you. I'm Andrew Carruthers. I work at London Stock Exchange Group. I'm the Director of Corporate Data Cloud, which is the conflation of two Snowflake accounts, one that we instantiated and built ourselves, another one which we acquired post-Refinitiv acquisition.
Okay. So Andy and I had a chat a few months ago at one of the Snowflake events, Data for Breakfast. And I think I recall during that one we were talking about, I don't know, your first couple of years, I guess, with Snowflake and how you got up to speed and, you know, what you learnt. I guess now you're kind of 3 years in, give or take. I guess the question we thought we'd talk about today is what would you do differently if you had your time again? If you know what you know now, how would you approach things a little bit more different than maybe you did?
Yeah, thanks. So it's been a very interesting journey. So when we started out with Snowflake, I knew nothing. I'd never, ever logged into Snowflake, but I was given this opportunity to build out a proof of concept over a 7-week period. And what I found, drawing upon my heritage with Oracle for about nearly 30 years, I suppose, it was actually a relatively easy transition to Snowflake. And the things that catch you out are the things that can come back to bite you later on. So really what I wanted to talk about today was, and the main theme, is if you had your time again, what would you do differently? So if I can just wax lyrical for a minute, Andy, if you'll just indulge me. When you start out with Snowflake, you don't know everything. Okay? Nobody does, and nobody even knows everything about a product that's been established for a very long time. So where do you start? Well, the first thing is draw upon your heritage. The things that you know will translate very well into Snowflake. But there are things that as you progress that you begin to understand that there are some vagaries and some differences, and those are the things that will catch you out. So one of the main things about moving to the cloud is that you've got to be very careful about protecting your data. Cybersecurity will be all over you. There was a perception right at the very beginning that Snowflake, because it's on the cloud, is inherently insecure. That is a false perception. We also encountered some legacy thinking. It's a relational database. It must have a security model that is very like Oracle, SQL Server, Teradata, or whatever. Again, that's not true. And what you have to do is rethink some of the fundamentals and adjust your approach accordingly. So one of the first things you might do is put a network policy in place to restrict access. It's a very sensible thing to do. But then you've got to understand your IP ranges, and in large organizations that can be quite difficult. So there are a number of things that you would want to do from the outset very differently. Your security features, your security profile will lend itself to a different interpretation and understanding. One of the features that Snowflake offers is the ability to restrict unloading data to an unknown URL. You might want to implement that as a feature, or actually as a security constraint. But then how do you monitor all of that? And these are some of the themes that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so I think when you're talking about quite a lot of stuff, so you obviously need to package that up in some way. So what's the approach been for bringing that together into something that I guess you can make very repeatable as you roll on new use cases into Snowflake?
So we developed the concept of a landing zone. So let's separate out platform from product. So many of us here are application developers and we just want to get on and crack on and build our apps. But the platform itself is a crucial part of the journey. Without the platform, you can't have a product. So my advice to those setting out, and we've discovered this later in our journey, we're now nearly 3 years in with successful production environments, is to retrofit components is actually quite difficult. But the landing zone, if you think about it as a holistic approach, and I hesitate to use the word DBA here because we all know what DBAs are, but there's an element of truth in that. So a landing zone is the core platform that you would give to your developers to build their applications on. Now that platform will have things like private link. It will have all your security monitoring, so your security guardrails would be in place. It will give you your cost monitoring, so when you run queries and you consume credits, you know where to attribute those credits to. And your FinOps colleagues will find that very useful. You've also got shares where you can actually, behind the scenes and very seamlessly, share data with consumers. These will be your customers, internal or external. And what you would want to do is look at how that data is consumed. And there is an evolving story for shares, but you would want to be able to expose a certain number of metrics around that. And as you go around this virtuous circle, if you imagine a pie chart, then you'll find that there are a bunch of requirements that you would have to meet, and there will be some reporting features you would want to implement. Other things you might want to do is implement with your data cataloging tooling, whether it be Calibra or any other tool. You might want to put together a set of platform documentation, so things like your cybersecurity template, your risk profile. These might be documents that you would actually want to put in place. And the last thing, and I say last because it is probably one of the most important, if not the most important thing to do, is to look at your disaster recovery profile as well and what you would want to do there. The reason I come on to disaster recovery last is that it's an evolving topic, and Snowflake have just released some enhancements for account level replication, for example, that will help in that respect. So I think what we have is a container, the landing zone, that encompasses many different aspects of what we would want to see as a platform that actually facilitates the product development. It leaves the product developers to get on with what they want to do, whilst leaving the maintenance of the platform and core capability with another team who are specialists in that area. If I may, just one more thing, Andy, because I can waffle on.
They're here to hear from you, not from me, Andy. So.
Remember what he said, is that the Centre for Enablement or a Centre for Excellence goes hand in hand with the landing zone. It's incumbent upon us with some skill, knowledge and expertise in Snowflake to actually seed our colleagues with that knowledge. So training guides, wikis, Confluence, how-tos, that kind of thing is really important. But also, if you're looking at a new team wanting to take on Snowflake, and in a federated environment, what we find is that the uptake of Snowflake happens at different paces. So we want a uniform expression of Snowflake throughout our environment, so we have consistency and it satisfies our risk management colleagues. But we also want to give the freedom to our developers, but our developers may not have that much expertise and they may be subject to the pitfalls. So call out to Snowflake Professional Services for me is an absolute must. Because they will seed the knowledge and they will give you the ability to understand your estate, know what you're dealing with, and they'll bridge some of the gaps for you. But the second thing is to have a core competent team who can perhaps parachute in or offer some skill, knowledge and expertise around particular aspects of Snowflake. Sorry, Andy.
No, it's fine. So somebody in your organisations, they want to deploy on Snowflake. You've got the ability to, like you say, give them a container that they can get going really, really quickly. You're hitting some key requirements, including, like say, putting things in place that they don't need to worry about. It's almost extending the simplicity of the platform, but also ticking the box on things like security and stuff like that. I guess I'm pretty sure everybody knows that seems like a really good idea, but we also know that rolling these things out can be quite challenging. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about, how did you, who are the key stakeholders? How did you win people over? How did you win hearts and minds to allow you to push this forward and roll it out as the standard across what is a complicated organisation and different teams with different priorities? I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Sure, thanks. So one of the things that we have to do is conduct a hearts and minds operation, because we all assimilate knowledge at different rates, and not everybody is at the cutting edge of where technology is going and product capability. They don't have an understanding because some of us immerse ourselves in it. We kind of eat, sleep and breathe it, all right? And we assume that people know things that we don't know. But it is incumbent upon us to go to our business colleagues and say, this is what the product can do, and to satisfy their requirements and their knowledge. To give you an example, I heard repeated comments about the security model, Snowflake security model. Well, it can't be that good, and we want to get away from a user entitlement-based model. So I took those comments and over a period of about 3 or 4 months, and the noise wasn't going away. It didn't matter what I said. So what I did was I sat at the console and I worked through every possible combination that I could think of ways of granting entitlement to a user and to a role. And systematically, I proved that it was not possible to grant entitlement direct to a user, in sharp contrast with other databases. That's a game changer. The only entitlement that can be granted is via a role. Everything is an object, and every entitlement goes via a role, and a role is granted to a user. That's a mind shift. And there were a couple of things that came out of that. One is that my colleagues moving from legacy databases readily grasped the impact, but then had to apply it to their own applications when porting to Snowflake. But the second thing is the message to our cybersecurity colleagues is that Snowflake is inherently secure because we only and can only implement a role-based access control method.
So that's one of the, I guess there's a few good call-outs there. Was there any other big challenge that you had to sort of overcome to kick things on, I guess?
Well, I think that after about a year of being in production, my risk colleagues were heard to say, well, we know Snowflake's inherently secure. Can you tell me who can see what? So it's rather like a layer of an onion. You start with something small, you give the information to people to satisfy their request and thirst for knowledge, and then the questions become more complex. Because once you've got a core established and accepted, then the next question is, who can see what? I'm satisfied the platform's secure, but now I want to make sure that my data is secure. We're starting to address that question. We have the roles. We know as technical people that our data is secure, but what we haven't done is fully communicated the message to the audience. And the question that follows from who can see what is, once you've seen the data, what did you do with it? Now, if you want to look at moving your data to cloud, then I strongly recommend that you look at the Cloud Data Management Capabilities, CDMC framework. That's available on the EDM Council website. It's about 160 odd pages of PDF, and it will give you about 50 odd controls, 50 odd steps for you to evaluate your migration to not just Snowflake, but any cloud-based platform. Because what the framework is a series of questions, but there are no reference architectures for any platform. As it happens, I've developed one for Snowflake that we're building out at the moment. But the kind of questions that are asked are, do you have a business requirement? Where's your project management oversight? What state of the project's at? It then moves into answering the questions of who can see what, and a whole bunch of guardrail questions. And then it comes on to, lastly, the technical architecture aspects of how did you arrive at this solution. So CDMC framework, it's available for free download. I'd strongly recommend it, but be warned, it's not easy.
So sounds like you made a great start. We know it's an evolving model. I guess what's the current focus, given where you are at the moment? Mainly, it sounds like it's a lot around that data lineage piece, but...
Yes, our data lineage is part of the CDMC framework, absolutely. So where we're at the moment is object tagging, massive benefit to our business colleagues. What I personally do is I find a feature in Snowflake and I build out a proof of concept that has that will lead to a successful business outcome. So I take it to my business colleagues and say, look, I've got this tooling here. If we do X, Y, and Z, let's say we take privacy tags and we tag our objects with the privacy tags, then you can search by the tag, and that will give you the objects that are tagged and the data as well. So as a simple proof of concept, you can get a very, very complex problem broken down into component parts. Now, we're not just talking about privacy here, you're talking about any kind of tagging you want, whether it be a line of business, a division, operating company, any tag that you can think of can be applied in this way, subject to the limit of the number of tags that can be applied to an object.
Okay. I mean, we keep coming back to data governance, and again, I think that's really important. Like you said, you summed it up nicely. You know, everything's moving to the cloud. People need to be convinced that things are safe in the cloud, and it's great you're able to take advantage of some of the new features we're rolling out to sort of build on it. So I guess if we change topic slightly, and we can maybe look at that. Obviously, keeping up with a lot of the new features we're adding into Snowflake all the time is quite demanding. I guess you're going to have to try and keep building those into your landing zone when you work out the ones that you're going to use. So I guess the general question is, what are the main features that have maybe been announced in the last few months that you probably has grabbed your attention the most, and you're the most excited about or most interested in following up in? Maybe not excited. I'll let you decide on that.
Well, just as a small aside, I wrote a book, Building the Snowflake Data Cloud, which talks a lot about what I'm talking about today. And I have a second book that I'm writing called Maturing the Snowflake Data Cloud, which talks specifically about the landing zone. But during the writing of the first book, I happened to be doing some work about 5 o'clock in the morning. I just happened to wake up and think, I've got to get on with this. So I sat out typing away, and I was searching the Snowflake documentation, which, if you haven't seen, it's really rather good. And I came across data classification. I happened to be writing a chapter at that time, which is why I was searching. And so I wrote up the feature, did a proof of concept just in the book, and then later on in the day, we had our weekly catch-up. And so Andy said, oh, and by the way, data classification has been released. I said, yeah, I know, and he looked at me. So, well, because it's all there in the documentation. If it's there, then it can be used. So I would recommend that you do keep an eye on what's going on, because it will appear in the documentation quickly. You should get notification, or you may get notification of new features. Back to your original question, because I realise I digressed and I apologise. But the Unistore, I think, has potential to be a real game changer. I think that as the product evolves, that's going to be massively important. I'm still a fan of the unstructured document support. Object tagging, again, massive fan of that. I think the biggest problem is, and I've said this tongue-in-cheek, is for the product development team, please just slow down, give me a chance to catch up, because it's actually hard work. I'm trying to understand what's useful right here and now, what's going to be useful in time. Getting onto the private previews, if you're able to do so, so long as you give something back, you'll find that you get a lot more out of the private previews. Very informative, very useful, very helpful.
Okay, I think we're good on time, so maybe just a slight left field one. You talked a little bit about the preview stuff, and again, if people do want to get involved in preview, it's a bit of a two-way street. We want people's feedback to see if the new feature, new features that are coming in, delivering what the customers want. So I guess maybe you just want to touch very briefly on that unstructured one, because that was one of the things we worked on together, and I think that's quite an interesting one.
So back in Summit, it was last year, 2021, so it'd be June 2021, I saw a presentation after the event, and it was on unstructured, and it was about the ability to pull content out of documents. And I thought, well, every organisation I've ever worked in has many, many SharePoints and document stores where the content is largely inaccessible. But what I saw was the opportunity to get some of our design documentation to pull the content out and make it accessible. So what we did was worked with the unstructured development team and built a content scraping tool, essentially. And we've since built a number of others for different document types, PDFs, Excel, etc., etc. And what we end up with is content in the database that we can search. Now, if you imagine what you've got stored up in your organization's file systems, and that must run into many petabytes in some cases, suddenly you've created another layer of the onion, not just structured data, semi-structured data, but now unstructured data. And then a whole raft of possibilities open up. So you could get into video, Internet of Things, audio, and really what Snowflake has done, I think, is a bit of a dam that's ready to burst in this area. And most of the data that we have in this world is in unstructured format.
So yeah, interesting couple of things you've called out there. Some stuff very roadmap, some of the recent announcements, and then the unstructured elements of that are available now as well. So definitely things people can try out. So I think we're not too far off coming up for time. Maybe just closing comments. I know maybe you mentioned it almost in passing, so do you maybe just want to announce your book? I think my copy's getting delivered tomorrow, and obviously you're going to have to sign it for me, but I didn't have it today, so blame Amazon. But there we go. So I don't know if you want to give a quick summary about the book and what you were trying to achieve with that when you decided to write that.
Sure. So look, I realise it's a bit of a plug, right? But I wrote the book. It's really quite an interesting story. So the publisher 10 years ago approached me on writing a book on times 10, and that fell through because there wasn't a big enough market. And purely by chance, in July last year, the publisher said, "Do you fancy writing a book on Snowflake?" So I went, "Yeah, all right." Well, don't ever write a book thinking you're going to get rich, because it's not that kind of thing. You write a book because you want to write a book. And yeah, there's a degree of self-promotion in it as well. But the bottom line is that with 30-odd years experience, I want to give something back. I want to tell people what my journey's been like and give some people some tools. Feel free to ignore everything that's in the book, right? I really don't mind, but at least you found out something you don't want to do. And one of the big reasons why we're engaged is because of how not to do things, right? We're engaged because we've got the grey hairs to stop the mistakes. And that's what I hope some comes out of the book, is that you can see that I'm passionate about it. If you're interested, it takes over an hour to write a page, 500 pages in the book, lots of reviews and lots of helpful insights from the editors, etc. It's a very cathartic journey, and I have to say this, that at the end of the journey, looking back, I actually feel like I know something. 10,000 hours to become an expert. I don't think I'm there yet, but I do know something.
I think everybody needs to know as well, it's not that Andy isn't busy, so this is just one of his many hobbies. So he's, but again, it's great. You're excited about Snowflake. You're an ongoing advocate for us, and obviously we thank you for that. But again, I don't think we can do questions with these, but I know we'll be around for a little bit as we wrap up. So just like to say thanks, Andy. It's always good to catch up. And,
Cheers.
okay, thanks everybody. Cheers.
Thank you.